Welcome to haslipcycleworks. In this episode, we're going to be taking an idea for a part all the way from up here as an idea to a fully functional 3D printed part that we're going to use on one of our projects. I'm going to show you the steps I take to get there, and well, cross your fingers. Let's hope it works. So the idea for the part is pretty simple. It's really just a clamp. The clamp is going to be made to wrap around and squeeze tight on the frame of Project Mini Trike. And that clamp is also going to hold the brake line. I want to get rid of these zip ties and make something a little more functional, something better looking. And I think we can accomplish that with designing our own part and then 3D printing it. When you're going through this process for yourself, you need to determine whether or not 3D printing the part is actually the correct path for you. There's some pros and there's some cons to 3D printing, and different types of 3D printing, printing in different materials. The list goes on and on. The printer is a Creality Ender 3 Pro, and the filament that we'll be using is Overture PLA filament in pure white, but please do your own research. With that being said, let's get back to it. Just like any other part, you've got to start with some good measurements and a plan. So for me, that whole process starts with a piece of paper and a pencil and either a measuring tape or a set of calipers or whatever the correct measurement device is for this case. In this case, I'm going to use a set of calipers, and we're going to measure the frame tubing diameter and the thickness or the diameter of this braided stainless brake line, which has these little isolators. We don't want the clamp to actually clamp onto the hose itself. We want to hold isolators. And the whole goal is to hold it up off the frame so that it doesn't rub or paint away and still look nice and be functional. So like I said, first things first, we're going to measure this up. And just a little tip for you guys, most of the software for 3D printing defaults to millimeters. So to make things easier, I'm going to make sure our calipers are set for millimeters. We've got our basic measurements from using our calipers. Now what I'm going to do is jot those down because I'm horrible at remembering things like that. And we're going to sketch out a kind of preliminary prototype of the part on paper. And we'll work out any problems, hopefully, on the paper before we actually start printing apart and wasting material and time. We know our frame tubing is measuring 25.3 millimeters. Brake line insulator, we need something 18 millimeters by 10.5. So I don't want to make this too complicated. So what I'm thinking is something kind of pill shaped with our 25.3 millimeter hole here, and then our 10.5 millimeter hole here. And then the clamping function will come, and this is just a rough drawing, so don't judge me too bad. We'll split it right down the middle. And then what we'll do is we'll have to have some sort of pass-through hole that we can then put some sort of hardware in place. Now that we've got our dimensions figured out for our part, it's time to start building the part in some sort of 3D software. What I like to use is Tinkercad. It is free and it's online. It is a web browser based software, so there's nothing to install on a computer, and all your files can be saved up in the cloud somewhere, so you don't have to worry about losing anything if you suffer from hardware failure on your computer. It's really basic. You simply create a login account, log in, start to create a new part, and you simply drag simple shapes onto the build surface, and you can expand them. You can change how tall they are, how wide they are. You can do positive and negatives to create holes. Real basic, but there's enough functionality and enough horsepower to build pretty decent parts. You can really get into it real deep. A lot of people recommend, though, that you go a different route if you start building more complicated things. Now that we have our part designed, what I'm going to do is delete half of it, and then when we go to print it, I'll actually print two of the halves, and by joining the two halves together with hardware, that will effectively make our clamp. Once we're satisfied with our model, what I'll do is I'll save it as an STL file with an appropriate name, and the STL file is pretty much a standard for 3D printing that we will then load into our slicer program. And my slicer of choice is actually Kira by Ultimaker, and it too is free. It does have to be installed though. And if you think of a slicer as something that just takes your 3D model and cuts it into layers and pretty much sends those layers as commands to your 3D printer, and 3D printer then prints it out. Printed out 4 pieces, so that'll be 2 clamps. And after a trip to the hardware store to get some suitable hardware, I think we're ready to see if this is going to work or not. You guys are going to find out at the same time I do, because I have not test fit these at all. So yeah, fingers crossed. Well, that fits really well. That actually fits better than I thought. So hopefully it continues down that road. I feel like it's gonna move too much. So what I'm gonna do is cut these zip ties here, pull this insulator back, and put the second one here. Well, that seemed like it worked pretty well. I'm going to call that a success, guys. So yeah, you can use 3D printed parts on your mini bike, mini trike, motorcycle, or whatever it may be. Not as difficult as maybe you had initially thought it was. And we knocked it out of the park. So if you guys want the STL file for those clamps, email me, haslipcycleworks@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to share it with you. Until next time, guys, get up, get out there and do it. Maybe even 3D print something.